In this video tutorial, I will introduce you to the Visual Studio Workspace. I will cover the components and features of Visual Studio that you will often use when developing your applications. The version of Visual Studio that I will use in this demonstration is Visual Studio Community 2015, which is free to download. If you have a different version, don't worry. There shouldn't be major differences assuming that you are using a version later than 2012. When you open up the Visual Studio, you will see the start page first. If you prefer, you can turn off this default behavior. To do that, you need to scroll down and uncheck Show Page on Startup checkbox. I generally prefer to have Start Page on Startup not only because it brings some news about .NET products and software updates, but also because it provides the new project and open project shortcuts. Also, just under these shortcuts, there is this section which displays the projects you have worked recently. This is a very convenient way to get back to work quickly. Visual Studio Workspace by default comes with this layout. There is menu bar at the top which has File, Edit, View, Project, and so forth these items. Under the menu bar, there is Standard Toolbar. I use really often this item which runs your application in debugging mode. I also recommend adding the text editor toolbar. To add this toolbar, what I need to do is just right click next to the standard toolbar and choose text editor from the menu. What I use frequently from this toolbar is the buttons for commenting out or uncommenting specific code lines quickly. I have Solution Explorer and Properties window displayed on the right. Indeed, there are two other windows on the left-hand side, Server Explorer and Toolbox. If I click one of these headers, let's try Toolbox, I will see the corresponding window displayed. And the same for the Server Explorer. I need to click on the vertical header bar to display the window because Auto Hide features was turned on. I need to click on the pin icon at the title bar to display Server Explorer and Toolbox, which will pin them to the workspace. I can also arrange the windows. To do that, I just need to drag and drop the windows by holding from their title bars. When I start dragging a window, the visualizer for the docking options will appear. One for the left frame, one for the middle section, and one for the right frame. I will illustrate how the visualizer works in the right frame. However, all the visualizers in other sections of the workspace work the same way. Currently, in the right frame, I have Solution Explorer at the top half and the Properties window at the bottom half of the frame. I can reposition the Solution Explorer within the right frame using the visualizer. If I drag it over the bottom arrow, you will see a blue shadow which tells me actually where this Solution Explorer will be placed if I release my mouse. The same for up, left, and right arrows. If I want to obtain a tabbed view, I can drag the window over the middle of the visualizer. Here, I have now two tabs, and one is Toolbox and the other one is Solution Explorer covering the whole frame. If I want, I can also reset the window layout, which will load the default layout to the workspace. I think you can better learn how this docking mechanism works by trying yourself. Let's continue with creating an empty web application. To do that, I can click on New Project on the Startup page, or I can click on the File menu, choose New, and then click Project. You may notice that the keyboard shortcut Ctrl-Shift-N is also provided next to the menu item. So I can use three different ways to create a project: File menu, the keyboard shortcut, or the shortcut in the Start page. I often just click New Project shortcut in the Start page, however, it really doesn't matter what you use. Once you click the New Project window will appear. In the middle of this window, you will see a list of items that you can choose to create, and these items are actually filtered by the categories selected from the left-hand side of the window. I will use C# in our project, so I will choose Visual C# first from the categories. Then I know that I will create a web project, so I will choose web from the categories, which will bring me the item that I need in the middle section, which is ASP.NET Web Application. To create a project or application, I need to type a project name. Let's type Learn VS, Learn Visual Studio. And when you type a project name, you may notice that solution name is also automatically set as project name at the bottom of the window. The solutions are the root containers for the projects. A solution can contain one or more projects, and every project has to be included in a solution. That is why Visual Studio is creating a solution as well, while we just intended to create a project. If you are developing a complex application that is composed of several projects, then it would make sense to name the solution differently with a more generic name. However, if you are going to create a relatively smaller application with just a single project, then you can just keep the solution name the same as the project name. For testing purposes, I will add SLN suffix to the solution name. Then I will click OK button. In a few seconds, the project will be created. So let's talk about these windows briefly. Solution Explorer is where you can find the files and resources of your project. Let's check the Solution Explorer window and see what files and resources were created in our project by default by Visual Studio. The root of our project is Solution. Under the Solution, you will see the project Learn VS. And under the project folder, you will see the files and resources of the project. Properties folder includes a file called assemblyinfo.cs, which contains general information about the assembly file like name, descriptions, and version, etc. The code in Visual Studio Applications will be compiled into an assembly file with extension DLL, and when you deploy your application on the server, you will need assembly file on the server side. References folder contains references to existing .NET libraries. Actually, each reference is an assembly file with DLL extension and contains hundreds of classes serving for different purposes. For example, systemdrawing.dll will include classes that will help you adding some drawing-related functionality to your application. Webconfig file is the configuration file for your application. For example, with webconfig, I can configure session timeouts, determine maximum size for file upload, and add the database connection strings, configure access restrictions to certain files and folders, and you can even do more configurations with webconfig. Toolbox is where you can find various controls such as buttons, labels, text boxes, depending on what you have opened in the editor. For example, when editing an ASP.NET web page or web forms, various web controls will become available in the toolbox that you can drag and drop to your page. Properties window shows the properties of any selected item from the Solution Explorer. This can be a page, a class, or any item in the Solution Explorer. If you select the solution name, you will see that Properties window now displays a set of properties for the solution, such as the path of the solution file in the local drive. More importantly, Properties window also shows properties for the selected web control in a web form. If you place a web control on a page, then select the control, you would see the Properties window loaded with a long list of items such as height, width, visibility text, that will help you to do certain changes or configurations on the selected web control. Most of the time, we use Properties window for configuring the web controls. And last, Server Explorer is commonly used for database connectivity. If your application has a database connectivity, Server Explorer is where you can access the database. Server Explorer actually helps access Lite SQL database management software that comes with the Visual Community Edition. This light version of SQL database management system offers limited options for database management, but it is still quite enough for managing databases in small or medium-sized web applications. Let's add a new item to our project. In order to do that, I need to right-click on the project name in the Solution Explorer. Then in the pop-up window, I choose Add, which will show me a new child menu, and in this menu I can choose new item, which will bring me this window where I can locate the class item. Or instead, when I want to add a class, I can directly click the class item at the bottom of the menu. This class item comes default at the bottom of this menu since it's very common that you will need to add a class to your project. Why? Because C# is an object-oriented language. Before we move forward, I want to explain several things about this menu. If you want to include an already existing item to your project, then you need to click existing item here. Then you need to locate the item in your local drive. Also, the 6 items located around the middle section of the menu are the default items. Under these 6 items, there will be a list of items generated based on the history of your activities. In particular, the recent items that you have previously added to any of your projects will be displayed in this section, which actually makes things very convenient for the developers. So you may see a different list of items depending on the files you have previously worked recently. This list can contain 5 items at most. Let's continue with creating a class. I will click class at the bottom of the menu, which will bring this window. I need to type a name for this new class. Let's name the class as test. Then I will click OK button. Test class is created and opened in the Visual Studio Editor. When you create a new application, your application will by default has a namespace named with your application's name, which is LearnVS in our case. Later, when you add a new item to the root of your project, like the way we added test class, your class will be declared inside the project namespace. Namespaces help us organize our classes and our code. Indeed, these using statements at the top of the page are actually referencing some other .NET namespaces which will allow us access classes existing in these namespaces. Note that using statements always goes to the very top of your page, your code file. I will close this editor window for test class to show you the preview feature. If this preview selected items icon in the Solution Explorer is selected, you can preview the items with a single click. If I click on test class, it will be displayed in preview mode with a ghost tab header aligned to the right of the tab area, and the same for web config. This feature is useful particularly if you need to review or locate some part of your code quickly. If let's say you have 15 classes to check something quickly without preview feature, you would need to double click on each item in the Solution Explorer to load them to the editor, which will really make this tab header area very crowded and very hard to navigate. If you change anything in the code file that is displayed in preview mode, then the code file will be opened in the editor mode automatically. Next, I want to introduce line revision marks. In order to illustrate the line revision marks, I will add several lines of code to the test class. Let's define an integer variable with an initial value of 100. You may notice that a yellow bar appeared at the beginning of the code that I have just added. This yellow bar indicates that the adjacent code has been changed or just added after this class file is loaded to the editor or after the last time the code was saved. Please press Ctrl S to save the changes to the test class. The yellow bar should now turn into a green bar. The green bar means that the adjacent code was new or updated and now it has been successfully saved. These two types of bars are useful in terms of helping you with detecting and keeping track of the changes in your code. You will definitely have a better sense of current state of your code with these helpers. Now I want to enable line numbers, so I can display or hide line numbers in the code. Numbering is not enabled by default in Visual Studio. However, we can turn on line numbers. In order to display the line numbers, normally we would need to choose Tools on the menu bar and then click on Options in the submenu, which opens the Options window where we need to expand the text editor and then select all languages. Instead of this long way to get that window, we can use Quick Launch, which is located at the top bar of the Visual Studio. Then we will type line numbers in the Quick Launch box and then choose the option listed. This will bring the options window with its specific section for configuring the line numbers displayed. In this window, I will check the line numbers checkbox and then click OK to save the changes. Now, I can see the line numbers adjacent to each line of code. Line numbers are particularly useful when you want to point to a specific line of code when discussing your code with others or explaining your code to someone else. Before I end this video tutorial, I want to explain briefly how to build your project. You are encouraged to build your code often, which will help you identify compile time errors such as incorrect syntax earlier before your program gets complicated, making handling these errors harder. Also, to run and test your application, you have to build your project to generate the compiled files. For build, there are 3 specific items in the menu that appears when you right-click on the project item in the Solution Explorer. Build item compiles only the code files which were changed and discards the rest. So it's a partial compilation. That is, if you change something in one class and then build your application, then only the class with the change will be compiled, whereas other classes will be discarded. Rebuild item doesn't care whether there is any change in specific code file or not. It just deletes all existing compiled files and compiles everything fully from scratch. And clean just deletes all compiled files and do nothing else. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.